In this module, we will resolve the conflict between cultural norms and our agency, our power to act freely, using Wittgenstein's theory of language, in which he has used the term language games. Especially this idea of language games is very helpful to understand our current topic. Wittgenstein says that we play language games with words. Language games means language activities. The word game resolves our issue. We know that we play games with rules. Now, this is actually a metaphor. You know, this word game is part of the word of games. खेलों की दुनिया से ये लफ्ज़ आता है. And any game has rules. We are familiar with these rules. We can play a game if we know its rules. So we know rules to play a game. Both are essential. Similarly, if we talk about language games, so to play language games, we know the rules of language games. The rules are grammar and pragmatics. Grammar tells us how you construct meaningful sentences, and pragmatics tells us when and where you will use particular sentences. Okay. We learn and know these rules because we play games, language games, so we know the rules. That's why nobody will say good morning in the middle of the talk. The norms of talk, the pragmatics, the cultural rules of communication, they tell us that when you begin your talk, then you will say good morning, not in the middle of the talk. So we know this, and that's why we can play a language game. That's why we can take part in some conversation. Similarly, now if we extend it to social games, social activities, social practices like marriage and veil, etc. So the same happens here. We cannot play these games also without rules, without norms, without cultural norms. This is here that cultural norms are involved. We learn rules. How? We learn these rules of social games, social practices. To play these games, we know them, otherwise we cannot play these social games. We have to learn them, and we know them through socialization during our childhood. And then as we grow, we learn such norms, such cultural rules from other contexts as well. We know rules of all games because we consistently practice them. Okay. Our actions maintain the rules. In simple words, because we play games and games are played by rules, so we know the rules. If we don't know rules, we cannot play any game, whether it is language game or social game. So in case of language games, you know the rules of grammar and pragmatics. In case of social practice, social games, you know the rules which are called cultural norms. So when we follow these games, language games or social games, we follow the rules. So through practice, we learn these rules. which I have said through socialization, we learn these rules. As we cannot violate rules in language games and other general games, so we cannot violate rules in social games, in marriage, in veil, and in other social practices. If culture requires wearing of veil for modesty, हया की वजह से veil का culture कहती है we will have to do that. Otherwise, we cannot play the social game. This norm exists because it becomes part of social practices. So we know rules, we know norms through practice of game are social practices. So they are part of, in other words, social customs. In this case, in particularly in social practices, in social games, they gradually become customs. Okay. We internalize these norms through socialization. So norms are not external. They are internal. They are part of our inner self. So when we learn the norms, cultural norms through socialization, what happens? We internalize those norms. We make them part of our thought, part of our inner self. So they are not external to ourself. There is no separation between ourself and norms. Norms और हमारी ज़ात में कोई फ़र्क नहीं रह जाता. Norms become part of ourself. We internalize them. How? Through socialization. What is socialization? Social interaction, social practices. Through taking part in social games, social activities, we internalize them. Internalize करने का मतलब ही ये है कि we make them part of our inner self. Okay. So if so, norms control our desire. If they are part of our inner self and desires are also part of inner self, so they would have effect on our desire. They would control our desire and action both. But norms have a stable form. They are prescribed. And actions are variable. This is the difference. When we internalize norms, they would control both. They would control our desire and action. Okay. But here, one thing is added, that norms are prescribed, they are in form of rules. But actions, they are not stable, they are not prescribed, they are variable. They are flexible. Even we can add new actions. Even we can make them flexible. Okay. Individuals and countries, they would decide the ways of acting on norms. Act कैसे करना है norm के ऊपर, we are free to do that. So here, in fact, cultural norms, they do not block our agency, they protect our agency. They allow us to act upon them according to our own personal, contextual, collective context. हमने पर्दा करना है, this is the norm. कैसे करना है? We are free to do that. All Muslim countries agree on veil, but how to veil varies from country to country. So we have agency. Norm and agency are together. A person knows the norm that consent for marriage is compulsory. This is the norm. लेकिन consent लेनी कैसे है? It depends on the will of that person. Are the customs, the culture, the surroundings of that person. So he has agency. So we conclude that our freedom, agency of consent, if we talk about consent of marriage, is protected. It is not restricted by norms. Cultural norms are not external to the self, they are part of the self.